Um, However, what we do know from research, and I can well believe that in Nigeria, Chinese films are not known, but we know that in some parts of Africa, Chinese films and Chinese television are increasingly popular, and that is in places where the Chinese companies have been the companies that have been bringing in satellite television and selling satellite dishes. So I read a very interesting essay recently about the situation in Kenya, where Chinese companies have been at the forefront of bringing satellite to ordinary people's houses and throughout the country. And along with the satellite then comes a lot of Chinese channels. And so if you want to watch Netflix, you have to pay extra. But of course, the Chinese channels come with the service. So lots of people there are quickly adjusting their taste to Chinese culture and picking up on stars that they like or individual movies that they like and so on.
I think this has gone from influence or soft power thing to more like an imposition. Do you think they're imposing upon those people in East Africa?
No, I don't think it's an imposition. No.
No, it's imperialism from below. Okay, there's a hard imperialism and soft imperialism. The hard imperialism, people come with guns and say, right, give away, we're taking over. The soft imperialism, people try to persuade you to do things. You may not necessarily like it, but eventually you become immersed in it and you like it. And some of it is quite self-imposed. Let's go back to what you mentioned about some people adopting Indian names. You know, somebody calling himself Khan or something like that. Notice very carefully, in the same cultural setup that you are operating, nobody calls himself Muhammad Schwarzenegger. All right?
Yeah.
Nobody. Yeah. Nobody calls himself Abdullah Willis after Bruce Willis. No, nobody does that because there's a separation. There is a barrier that Schwarzenegger, Bruce Willis, Chris Hemsworth, and all that, they are the other. They are Christians, and it is wrong for you to adopt their names. But Khan is Muslim, you know, and then Arjun and all this, they are Muslims. So there is some sort of, it is outside, inside. It's an outside, but it's really inside because we share the same interfaces in Islam and cultural behaviors and so on and so forth. So they believe that they can adopt that. But it's all part of the soft imperialism strategy. Okay? I mean, you don't see Northern Nigeria movies making any headway in India. But you see all these Indian films coming in. So I even wrote a paper, and I don't mind sharing it with you, Chris, called Imperialism from Below. So you talk about imperialism coming from the United States, all right, or UK or somewhere in the West. But now you have imperialism coming from below, from the horizontal axis of the planet, from India, from China, from all those places. Soft imperialism. Like you said, the satellite is free in East Africa. And in fact, at one stage in Ethiopian Airlines flight, they had Chinese announcements. Because I used to travel to East Africa very frequently. I mean, they will announce whatever it is in English, then they will do it in Amharic, and then they will also announce it in Chinese. And when you go to Addis Ababa airport, there are a lot of Chinese shops, and the Africans, they are wearing all this the Chinese women's dress and so on. So what we are dealing with,
even the headquarters of African Union was built by the Chinese government.
That's right. So it's imperialism from below. Yeah, yes. Chris?
No, I was just going to say, of course, Ethiopia is one of the countries that has a very, very strong connection with China. And also, you know, in Africa as a whole, maybe less so in Nigeria, but China is the biggest economic player now and has been for at least the last decade. So actually, one of my colleagues, somebody who researches Ethiopia and Ethiopian film, and is actually married to an Ethiopian, told me that, and showed me some films, that the word in colloquial Amharic, when they're referring to a foreigner, it used to be ferenge, and it meant, you know, a white guy, right? But the word now is China, and China means anybody, right? Who's not Ethiopian, basically, not African. So it's quite possible that in Addis Ababa an ordinary person on the street would point to me and go, "Oh, China." Not because they think I'm Chinese, but because China is now just the word for foreigner.
Oh my God, this is very serious.
So yeah, this is a really, big cultural impact that comes through the economy more than anything else, comes through China's trade domination in Africa, of course, supported by government policy, but still, it's a trading thing that has really taken off here.
Yes, of course.
So that is imperialism from below, because they are not using guns, they're not using arms, they're not twisting anybody's arm, they're just making things available. And everybody say, "Oh, this is wonderful," like Father Christmas has arrived, and therefore they're spreading all these things all over the place, not knowing that beneath it all is a programming that it's not something that is meant for just like a year or two, but for the next century. You continue relying on China for all this. They had the same thing here in Kano. The markets, local markets were flooded by the Chinese, selling cultural products, but cheaper. Like for instance, one of the things that Kano State was very famous for was a dyeing cloth. They pick up a cloth and then they dye it with indigo dyes and all that. The Chinese just simply went and created their own fabricated form, and they were selling it back to Kano, cheaper. It doesn't smell, doesn't get off your hands, or the dye doesn't wash off your hand. Their own was a permanent thing. And the local dyeing industry came to me and asked for intervention. Said, "What can I do? This is a government policy. Government allows them." So instead of fighting them, why don't you ask them to come over here and establish a factory that will enable you to modernize the process, and that way you see there's globalization. It's a global, but at a local level. Instead of fighting them and asking them to stop doing it, but they have been doing it. In fact, even the head of the Chinese community here in Kano was given some kind of a royal title, so that he is now embedded within the traditional cultural fabric of Kano. And during the events, like Durbar events, with all this horse riding stuff like that, he rides his own horse. So he is retained as a representative of the Chinese in Kano. And I think he was even given some kind of emeritus professorship or something, or doctorate, honorary doctorate at a local university. So the Chinese influence, the Indian influence, is all about imperialism from below. It's about soft imperialism, about how identities, cultures are renegotiated on a platform of, imposition, particularly through media products initially, but then now through trade and things like that. The Indians focus more attention on the film industry. I mean, they have Indian restaurants that nobody goes in because, first of all, the food is expensive, and secondly, it is a little bit crazy, and it's also similar to our own, like biryani. When you say biryani, it's like the padika. I mean, so why would I go to a restaurant and eat a fancy tapati when I can get the whole thing at home? So the restaurants and things like that, even the clothing were not really popular except during ceremonies. But the Chinese focus more on market products, and things like that. But I learned that the Chinese are now trying to do a TV show in Hausa in China. So they have some Hausa people go over there, and they are doing a TV program, and they are very, very aggressive in learning the Hausa language. They acquire Hausa names and so on. I'm part of one of the university systems, and we always keep talking about all this Hausa acculturation. But I think the Chinese are more interested in commerce and trade rather than cultural domination. Yeah, unlike in East Africa, where there is so much diversity of cultures that it is very easy for them to provide a unified cultural front for people to absorb, to copy.
However, I mean, Xi Jinping has emphasized this idea of telling the Chinese story, right, to the world. So it is true that although at the moment Chinese films and Chinese television are not hugely popular, the Chinese film industry and television industry, with the support of the Chinese government, very much wants to become global. And so I think they are putting, it doesn't surprise me to hear that they are making Hausa movies or Hausa television in the way you were saying. And I think they will look for every mechanism possible to try to expand their influence and try to get, as large an audience as they can. So this is quite logical for them. It's both the logic of capitalism, right? And also the logic of the Chinese state power, global power. And I think these things go together. So even though right now in Africa, most of Africa, and also in most of the West, very few Chinese films get an audience. People don't know the names of Chinese film stars and so on. I think we would be making a big mistake if we think 10 years from now it will still be the same. We can't be sure, of course. Of course, maybe nothing will change, but they're going to try as hard as they can to find ways to make audiences in Nigeria, in London, know who those film stars are. And I have to say that the quality of Chinese filmmaking, the production quality of entertainment filmmaking, is now of Hollywood standards. So audiences who are used to and like Hollywood movies, if they start watching Chinese films, they will find, oh, they're also full of action. They also have lots of special effects. They also have very tightly told stories because they've been learning a lot from those commercial, older commercial industries like Hollywood, but also more recently, South Korean cinema as well, of course.
I think you're right in the sense that part of the problem here in northern Nigeria is that the resident Chinese people are not doing much to promote Chinese popular culture. They are more fanatically focused on markets. Unlike the Indians, we have a vibrant Indian community here in Kano that promotes. In fact, at one stage, they were the only ones selling Indian films because they import them directly from India. And the soft imperialism of Indianization has gone to such an extent that now Hausa filmmakers remove the voices from Indian films and substitute them and overdub them with the local Hausa translations. And they're able to get the translation from Google Translate. So just simply extract it and then send it to Google Translate. I don't know how they do that. And they were able to get the transcript, they were able to get the translation, and then they read out the translation and overdub them on their film. And that is hugely popular. So popular that they have created a new term for it and read the Hausa language. They now call it Superpota. Okay, it's something like a transformation or something like that. So the resident Chinese are not doing much to really promote that particular, let's watch Chinese films and so on. Secondly, American films are still a major force to reckon with. Part of the reason was that they also include a lot of clearly identifiable icons. Like when you show an American film and you show some black people, black faces and so on, people tend to say, oh yes, I can identify with Chris Elba, I can identify with, all these big top black actors, and that reaches out. That shows the diversity of the United States, of course. You can't just make an all-white film. But even in the superhero movies, you have all black actors flying all over the place, throwing fire from their hands and so on. And that creates a connect with people. When we were kids watching Mission Impossible, one of the reasons why we watched it was because of the black actor in Mission Impossible TV series. I mean, he attracted us. Oh, and we always believe he's a Hausa person. We just don't care that he was an American. We say, oh, there's a Hausa person in that film. And so we wanted him because of him. And we're all rooting for him, even if he was a bad guy, even if he was a bad actor, we're rooting for him. So this anthropological connection. Sorry?
At least there is a representation.
Yeah, that you are represented. Your race, your color, whatever it is, you should be represented. I'm not really sure I can see the Chinese being that diversified. I mean, all their films will have to be about themselves. And then the names, man, I mean, the names are just horrible. Chi Tan Kan Kan or something like that. Very, very difficult to pronounce. And therefore, you cannot really connect. But you can say Arnold, you can say Bruce, you can say Chris, you can say, Lee or something like that. So I think these are the very interesting things. And I think I like the comment you made that things are not going to be like that. In the next 10 years, there will be transformation. And I think the guys, the Chinese themselves, are aware that if they really want to penetrate, they have to do more. But I think they're doing a good job in the terms of marketing in West Africa, doing a very good job in terms of both marketing and popular culture in East Africa. But I am not really sure, and I'm not in a position to this, but I would say the resistance of Islam is more possible here, let's take from Chad all the way to Mauritania. I mean, the Islamic force is extremely strong. And this idea of communism and the Chinese godlessness is spread so widely that it might be very difficult for them to supplement the popular culture. People don't care who makes a bucket. They don't care who makes a mat, but they care who says something about their religion. So they can buy Chinese products, but not Chinese ideology. And I think that is a very interesting thing. Maybe we wish to discuss it. If you are looking at the Chinese influence in Africa and Islam and so on, we will be very, very happy to collaborate with you and provide you with hosting collaboration.
I think that the Chinese filmmakers are increasingly aware of these issues. I mean, I'm not sure so much specifically about Islam in Africa, but they are certainly, for example, one of the big films made earlier this year is a science fiction film set 50 years in the future called Wandering Earth. It's about saving the world, of course. Chinese main character leading that process, but many of the other characters are from other places around the world. So in the same way that Hollywood does that too, right? It's going to be Tom Cruise saving the world, but with all these sidekicks from other countries.
Yes. Yeah.
So the Chinese filmmakers are also doing that kind of thing. So increasingly, you will, I think, see, oh, there's somebody representing Africa, On Chinese television already, there are more and more Chinese-speaking Africans who are living in China, who are establishing a presence in Chinese popular entertainment. So I wouldn't be surprised if they start to find their way into the movies as well soon.
Yeah. Professor Chris, I think Professor Abdallah and Chris, we are running out of time. It's been like 1 hour, 18 minutes now. Please spare me like 5 more minutes to conclude. I've got some very, very much interesting comments from some of our viewers. Professor Chris, you started talking about other Asian movies like Korean film. In fact, to be honest with you, the young ladies nowadays are very much obsessed about Korean films. This is because of the romantic stuff that they see and the beauty and the handsomeness of the characters. There's this joke that we tell among ourselves that if you have a girlfriend and she starts to kind of distance herself from you, do a little bit of digging. You will discover that she's a fan of Korean movies and TV shows, and some of them have tended to fall in love kind of virtually with the Korean actors and actresses. Korean movies have now become so popular and very, very much interesting. And I don't know, probably in the next couple of years, they may outshine some Bollywood films. Jidda Alice Wade, she's my classmate at BUK. She says, honestly, Asian shows and movies are taking over the entertainment industry in Africa as a whole. That's her own opinion. I've been watching them for a while, but it's becoming more rampant now as people are finding out how good they actually are. Asians, especially Chinese, are known for their excellence in technology spare. I'm talking about CGI and green screen. I don't know what that is. Some stories might not be realistic, as a lot of people keep telling me, but they do sure give you the adrenaline rush. Asian shows are very much popular because of how good their plots are. Of course, there are some cliche parts, but they are very, very creative. This person is a very much good fan, a very good fan of Korean movies. She watches them. She posts clips on her WhatsApp status about the movies and the stars and so on and so forth. Chris, what can you say about popularity of Korean movies against the Chinese, for example?
So I think when in 1997, the Hong Kong film, like I told you, became more turned towards China. Before that, Hong Kong film was very much the sort of global industry, right? And we were talking earlier about Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan and so on.
Yeah.
At that point, I think South Korean film stepped in, and South Korean film and South Korean television has taken over that role of providing a globally popular East Asian culture, a pop culture of television shows, singers, music, movies, and so on, that Hong Kong used to have 40 years ago. And now it's South Korea. And that is really fascinating change. Again, to try to explain why that happened would take a long discussion. I think what I would say is, I know from having I spent quite a lot of time in South Korea. South Koreans, of course, hoped for that, but I think they are as surprised as everybody else. Very happy, but very surprised that it's happened. Again, I think we have to emphasize that this has mostly happened, a bit like Bollywood, through market channels more than through, direct government pushing of something. It's happened through marketing. Yeah.
So it's a market-driven stuff. Professor Abdallah Uba Adamu, I don't know, we Africans, especially the people of Kano, when you ask them the differences between the Chinese, the Koreans, the Japanese, they just say they are just Chinese. Do you also have this? We don't know.
Well, they also have the same thing with us. Although we are not, of course, about race, they are different. They are distinct variation of their own race. But we also have our own distinct variation of our own race. The Ghanaian, the Ghanaian and Togo, Burkinabe, Nigerian, they all kind of look the same. And it's a joke to us that when you go to all these European airports, and the security agents will not distinguish between a Ghanaian and a Nigerian and so on. They're all black, they all look the same. Similarly with the Chinese, the Asians, Chinese, Korean, and so on. But if you look at them carefully, of course, there are distinct differences. And I think what makes the Korean movies so interesting is I think they go out of their way to select very beautiful people. Like they do. I mean, most of the actors in Korean film don't look like normal human beings. I don't think they're the normal people you see in Seoul or whatever. They go out of their way to get beautiful people. They look plastic, actually, in my view, because they don't look real. They look so tout. They don't look real. So this is the problem with that. I don't watch those Korean films except for Squid Game. I mean, my daughter insists that I should watch Squid Game, and she lives outside the country. She lives in another country, but she said, "Oh, Dad, you have to watch Squid Game. It's fantastic." So I said, "Okay." I got it, and just couldn't bother enough. I mean, it sounds gory to me, in a prison and all that. So I just couldn't be bothered. But I think you have raised a very, very critical point. There's an Asian cinema, there is Indian cinema, there's American cinema, and all of these are dovetailing into Africa. What are the consequences for African filmmaking and African cultural power? What will happen in the next 10 years? This is something that we really need to focus attention on.
Oh my God, I really would love to have time for that. And let's hope maybe in the next couple of weeks or months, if both of you could be available, we could organize something like this, because this is a critical topic, Professor Chris.
I agree.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll do that. And maybe I will speak to Professor Roger Stahl, that expert on American movies, to see if he could be joining the panel.
No problem.
So what is it that I have not said? What is it that I have not asked, which should have been asked?
You have less than 5 minutes. You have less than 5 minutes. So what you should do is winding up, but you have about like 3 minutes now, right? Or 2 minutes.
Yeah. So, well, I'm just asking you, like, what tell us some of your final remarks.
This is an open discussion. I mean, it's not really focused on a particular specificity, but on a larger forum, you know, you could have me much more specific questions and so on. This is a brainstorming session where we share our own opinions and perceptions. I think you have fairly asked a question that need to be asked. Because really, the star of the show is Chris, because it's about Chinese films and their influence in Africa. Okay, I just simply come in to provide an appendix, as it were. So I think it's wonderful, and I'm happy knowing Chris. At least we are now connected virtually, and I hope we sustain our relationship one or the other. I will share one of my papers with you so that you can see how soft imperialism is working right here in northern Nigeria with regards to Indian films.
Thank you very much. That sounds really fascinating. Yeah, I certainly am very interested in these kind of, you know, South-South connections, if you like, and be that Chinese film in Africa or other kinds of connections like that. And I think for us in the West, it's really important for us to understand that we are moving towards a more multipolar world rather than one that is completely centered on the old colonial metropolis or the USA, right, as it was in the last century. And so in that situation, I really think for everybody, it's important for all of us to try to understand what are these other kinds of connections that bypass the US or bypass Europe. And of course, Bollywood in Africa is another really good example. So thank you very much.
Yeah. So, Professor Abdallah, what can you say about the show?
Oh, the show is good, fantastic, excellent, stimulating, and a very good thing for a young man who's still a student, by the way, but he's doing very well, very, very good. And he's doing more than what you would have expected at his level of experience and age. And I think this is wonderful. You are truly a star, and you are heading towards bigger and bigger things.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Abdallah. Professor Chris Berry, what can you say about the show?
No, fascinating. I really embrace the opportunity to, you know, talk about and to talk with you about these topics. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed, Professor Chris Berry, for being on the show and for providing us with your expert analysis on this topic. And many thanks indeed to Professor Abdallah Uba Adamu. I'm looking forward to having more of such engagements with you people. And I wish you all the best on behalf of everyone that has contributed to the production of the show. My name is Umar Isa Nundugo saying we'll be back very soon. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
All right.